Okay, this represents the Assumption of Mary. I have to be very honest, this is one of my favorite windows, although I love them all. But I think the look on Mary's face and the way she's going, it's like, I'm going home, okay? And so she's being taken up into heaven. You see that she's standing in a crescent moon. This is another symbol of Mary. Where does the light of the moon come from? It comes from the sun. Mary reflects the light of the sun. It's sort of a pun in English, but it's very true. That's what Mary does. She reflects the light of the sun. And that's why one of her symbols is a crescent moon. She's wearing a blue robe, which represents her blessed humanity, and the white robe as well, representing her purity. You notice we don't often see pictures of Mary uncovered. Usually she's wearing a veil. Here she has her long flowing hair. Well, that's another symbol of her virginity. It used to be that when women got married, they would cut their hair short as a symbol of the marriage having been consummated, okay? And so this is still, I think, another symbol of Mary's virginity. She also is shown in this wonderful gold aureole as a special reward in heaven. Her huge halo here has 7 8-pointed stars in it, and 7 represents perfection and completion, and 8 represents man's regeneration and rebirth. So you get a double meaning in there. Now there are 6 angels in here, angels again representing creation. There are 6 angels and there are 6 cherubim if you count all the heads in there. The cherubims, the 6 representing creation and perfection. The angels, one's carrying palms representing peace and victory. Another one has lilies, a symbol of Mary's perfection and chastity. One has a halo or a laurel around her head of blue and white hyacinths, representing prudence, peace, and desire for heaven. The rose being held by one of the angels over here on the right, just above the one who's holding the crown, represents heavenly joy. Again, probably thornless roses representing purity and triumphant love. The angel over here on the right is holding the crown. Mary is going to be crowned Queen of Martyrs and Queen of Heaven. Now here comes a surprise. Look at the very uppermost window. That is a depiction of God. Okay, now why do we know that? We know that because he's wearing a triangular halo. Only God gets to wear a triangular halo. The other parts of the Trinity get a 3-part triangle, but they don't get, they get a 3-part halo. They don't get the triangle. So he's shown here, I think, blessing the scene, obviously, with the Holy Spirit right below him. And to me, he looks like an Old Testament prophet at this point. I was very surprised when I discovered why he had a triangular halo. Beautiful colors and everything on this. The colors of the angel's wings and all that I think are wonderful. We'll take a minute and we're going to go through the windows that are here in the apse. Okay, this is, the apse. This is, where the altar is, and we have 7 windows here, okay? 7 again, the symbol of completion and perfection, okay? But they're also divided. You have the crucifixion in the center. You have 3 windows that are from the Old Testament, 3 windows that are from the New Testament. That's why they're divided that way. They're divided basically by Christ's crucifixion. The first window here is the sacrifice of Abraham. And Abraham, who had waited many years for a son, okay, and finally had a son, and then God, in testing him, said, take your son up to the mountain and take some wood, and I want you to sacrifice your son. And having the unquestioned faith that he did, he took his son up there, left his servant down at the bottom of the mountain, made his son carry the wood for the sacrifice, because the son knew they were going to do a sacrifice, carry the wood for the sacrifice up there. And then his son asked, well, where is the lamb? And he said, God will provide the lamb. And he had put him on the altar, and then the angel Zachiel who means the righteousness of God came and stayed his hand and kept him from killing his son. And if you can see it, you have to get really far over. Over on the very far left-hand side is a ram who was caught in the bushes. That became the sacrifice. Now, he had, Isaac, he had to carry his own wood up to the altar. And this is a symbol. Christ carried his wood to his sacrifice, all right? And so there was a lot of symbolism there. What looks like almost like a red scarf down at the bottom, if you look very closely, it's like a little miniature Smokey Joe Weber or something like that. And that's actually the flames from the fire that was going to be the sacrifice. These windows all have dedications. This one was donated by the Catholic Daughters of the American Court, number 756. A lot of these groups that we used to have no longer exist within the church, but these windows were all donated by different groups within the church. Okay, the next one is Abraham and Melchizedek. Abraham is the gentleman in the gold. Lot is standing behind in the purple. Melchizedek is in the red. Okay, Abraham's nephew Lot was captured by a warring tribe, and Lot went out and recaptured him and defeated the other army, came back, and when they returned in triumph, they were met by Melchizedek, who was both a priest and a king. And he offered a sacrifice for their victory, and a normal sacrifice would have been the slaughter of an animal. And he offered bread and wine, and this is the only place in the Old Testament where bread and wine is offered as a sacrifice, okay? Melchizedek is priest and king. Christ was priest and king. He is a symbol for the priests, okay? Priests, when they become a priest in the manner of Melchizedek. Melchizedek, I think, gets all of 2 lines in the whole Bible, okay? But he was considered such a significant figure for the bread and wine and for the sacrifice that he is very much revered in here. The castle has 3 windows in it, which may be a symbol of the Trinity, maybe stretching things also, I'm not sure. But when we had our nativity scene up here, they had the turret with the window in it to try to tie together some of the Old and New Testament things about Christ. This one was donated by the Society of Christian Mothers. The next window is the Passover. And these, you may wonder, Passover, the Jews were very poor slaves, okay, and yet they look like they're pretty well dressed here, okay? Well, by tradition, they ransacked the area before they left. Once they were set free, they just went crazy, okay? And they ransacked it. And so we think this is probably why they are wearing a little bit more elaborate robes than they might have been otherwise. The figure in the back is putting blood over the lintel, the lamb's blood that was going to represent when the angel of death came, that they would pass over any doorposts that were marked with the blood of the lamb. The candelabra has 7 candles in it. There are 7 days in Passover. All right. Again, symbol of 7 on there. They are basically all ready to leave. He said, have your feet shod and your loins girded and be ready to leave. This is probably Moses in the center. We know Moses supposedly had red hair, where we get our tradition of people with red hair having a fiery temper, because he was, that way. But on the table, if you have binoculars, you can see it, there is a roasted lamb, okay? And Moses is holding, almost looks like a rose up to his lips. Well, actually, at Passover, they dip bitter herbs into salt water and then eat them. And this is a symbol of the bitterness of their slavery, but their freedom that comes with it. So, that's a long-term Jewish tradition. The girl is holding a loaf of unleavened bread. They were not supposed to have time for the bread to rise before they left. That's why they have unleavened bread. The lady next to the girl is wearing a necklace of pearls, again, a symbol of salvation, which was salvation for the Jews. Gold earrings, a circle is a symbol of eternity. And then this one was donated by the Sacred Heart League. All right, this is the crucifixion, the ultimate sacrifice. And these all deal with sacrifice. The altar is where we have our Eucharistic sacrifice at Mass. So you have the NRI sign over Christ, okay? That stands for Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. There was no letter J in Latin or Hebrew for many, many years. It was the language, so it was I was loose. But you can get the N is Nazareth, the R is Rex, King, and I for Israelis, Nazareth, King of the Jews. So it's not too hard to figure out on that. You can see Mary and John, who were at the crucifixion. They have their halos there. You can see Christ's wounds. In front of the cross is an open tomb. And this comes from Matthew, that when Christ was crucified, tombs opened, the earth quaked, and saints walked the earth. So it can also represent the tomb that Christ is going into. The trees in the back, the cedars are on the right, are representing immortality and everlasting life. The aspens over on the left, there's a story about the aspens, okay? Two versions of it, very much the same though. It's said that when Christ was crucified, all the trees and animals bowed down except for the aspens, and they were condemned to quake for the rest of their life. That's why we have quaking aspens, okay? The other story is that the aspens were used for the wood of the cross, and they were so ashamed that to this day the aspens quake. Okay. So this one was donated by the St. Mary Court Women's Fraternity, basically, is what it says. This one is signed. We do have some of the windows that actually are signed by the company that created them. And this one is signed by the Tyrolean Art Glass Company in Innsbruck, Austria. And that's how we know where a lot of these windows came from. Some people ask me, why isn't it a three-part halo? And I think because Christ is just at this point dead, okay? I mean, this is supposedly the point between, and so I think it's just a symbol of, he's sort of in between. And I don't know that, but I've always been puzzled why he doesn't have a three-part halo in this scene. All right, the next one is the Last Supper, okay? In the back, over Christ's shoulder, you can see the figure in black who's leaving. It's the only one that doesn't have a halo, and that's Judas. He's being sent out. Go and do what you need to do, he's being told. He has his back turned on the group. All the others have halos. Now, there are only 8 of the disciples represented here, and I don't think it's because they couldn't get them all in. I think it's because, again, 8 represents man's resurrection and regeneration. And this is what the Last Supper that Christ is passing out is symbolizing. If you count all the figures at the Last Supper, there were the 12 disciples in Christ. There were 13. And so this is one of the places we think we get our superstition about the number 13 being unlucky. There were 13 at the Last Supper, and one of them was a traitor. This one was donated by the St. Clara branch of the Women's Catholic Union. On that. Oh, one thing that always strikes me about this one that I don't have written down, the Eucharist, the host that Christ is holding, is probably only about this big, and yet it's always the brightest, whitest. Even when it's cloudy, it just shines through, and I just think that's remarkable. I mean, there are other whites in there, and it's always just the purest and the whitest. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. This is feeding the multitudes. Philip and Andrew were with him, and Christ had a large crowd that he had been preaching to, and it came to be dinner time, and people weren't going home. Christ said, well, feed them. And they said, well, how in the world can we feed all these people? And there was the boy with the 2 fish and the 5 loaves. 2 and 5 make 7. Beginning at the point here, 7's, completion and perfection. And it says he fed 5,000, not counting women and children. And he had 12 baskets left over, and 12 again represents the universe. Now, one of the stories that I've heard, and I heard this from a nun, is that when people traveled to hear someone, they often brought lunch with them or food with them. And what they basically did actually was just share among themselves. And of course, the loaves and fishes were multiplied as well. But that's how they were able to feed so many people, which I think the sharing aspect doesn't take away from the other aspects of that. This was donated by the Holy Name Society and also is signed by the Tyrolean Art Glass Company in Austria. The next one is called Mass in the Catacombs. We often think of the catacombs as places where the Christians sought refuge during persecution, and that isn't really true. They may have done that, but basically the catacombs, which are tunnels mainly under the streets of Rome, they built altars to saints down there, and they would often go down there to worship, okay? So this is, again, a symbol of sacrifice for the saints and a symbol of worship. They were often dedicated to these. This represents modern sacrifice, though, to, more or less an everyday sacrifice. You notice the priest, who's actually a bishop. We know that because there's the crozier, the walking staff that he has a very elaborate curl to it, and the white scarf is a symbol that the bishop will often carry coming in. If you've ever been here when the bishop has been here, he usually has a very elaborate one also. It's called a crozier. And the altar has a crucifix on it, the chalice, 2 candles. We always have 2 candles representing the divinity and the humanity of Christ are always done. And that framed card that's on there had me puzzled for a while. If you look up on the altar, it looks like almost like a mirror or something like that. A priest explained to me that they often had some of the things written out that they could read. And so that was often up there, like they open the lectionary or the gospel to read today, that they often had things written out for them there. So that's what that is. There's a painting of Christ the Good Shepherd in the background. Yeah, Christ the Good Shepherd is a traditional scene, may well have been seen in catacombs, probably more than one on there. There's the altar boy, and the back is ringing the Sanctus bell, which we recently initiated, that we ring the bell during the Mass. And the boy down over in the back, if you can see him low, you see his red collar kneeling down there. He's got what looks like a gravy boat, okay, but it's not, it's incense. It's an incense bowl that he has, okay. So this one is donated by the St. Mary Ladies Sodality, and a sodality is an association for charitable purposes. Blue technically is not usually a liturgical color, but we are probably looking at a Mass that was said for Mary, because if it's a Mass for Mary, the priest is allowed to wear blue, okay? The popes have worn blue for Mary, and our priests have, well, it's a white robe and has a big blue panel down the center. It's always looked green to me until I realized it was really dark blue, but I'm guessing that's why he's wearing blue. Plus, it's also donated by the St. Mary's Society, so I think that's why we're pretty sure. Most of these were installed in the 1920s, okay? Over a period of time. Yeah, I'm sure it took, I'm sure it was over several years starting, I'm not even sure how early. I mean, the church was rededicated in 1927, but they probably would have even already installed some of them at that point. Now we're going to turn around. We know that this window was not installed until 1953. We're not exactly sure why, because it was created by F.X. Zettler in Munich, Germany. And F.X. Zettler was a very, very famous stained glass maker. And chances are that it was actually ordered prior to World War II, but got caught up in World War II. It either was stuck in Europe or it was stuck in New York. Okay, we're not quite sure which, and never made it to the church until 1953. When they were going through investigating, having somebody take the windows down and refurbish them, they interviewed several companies, and they came across one in Wisconsin who actually had bid on making these windows. And I actually have some prints of the windows that were planned that would have been totally different than these, and it was symbols of Naperville, okay? But I don't know when it got changed, but and it may have been that they thought they weren't going to get this window and they were looking at something new. So there's a little mystery to this as to why. But we do know it was installed in 1953. It has 2 signatures, one from F.X. Zettler, one from Munch and Company, I believe his name, in Chicago. It says Chicago 41. they may have either had to repair the window or they may have been the ones who installed it. I don't know whether the 41 refers to an old-fashioned zip code or whether it refers to the year. It doesn't say. But I do know from a stained glass expert that if anything is done to a window to change it at all, it has to be signed again so that people know that there was something done to the window. But we don't know what. So just one of those interesting mysteries. Well, this is Christ the King. As you can see, it is very elaborate and much busier. It actually can be a little bit hard to look at. It's so busy. But again, here the windows play off of each other. Here you have Christ the King over the altar with the INRI over his head. And you have Christ the King, INRI, at his feet. Christ has become the King of the world, okay? And it's now at his feet. It's become his footstool. So it has become true, okay? What was meant as a mockery has become true in this window. Now, you have Peter and Paul on either side. You have Peter over on the left-hand side. You can tell because he's holding those keys that we talked about. And over on the other side, you have St. Paul. He has a downturned sword. If you remember, Paul originally was Saul, and he persecuted Christians. And then he had a conversion. There's a painting about that over here. And so the downturned sword represents his conversion, that he no longer persecuted the Christians. I can't go into all of the symbols here because there are too many. They're very hard to see. But if you go to the I, the first I in INRI, and go a little bit, maybe a foot, if you go into that panel that's right next to it and go up just a little bit, you may be able to see a dark-skinned figure, okay? All right. This, you're going to find this probably hard to believe, but I believe it was until 1963, Naperville had on its books a statute that said anyone of color had to be out of town by sundown, okay? The congregation at Peter and Paul was very proud that they had someone who never left town, okay? So, that and all these other symbols that are in there, most of them symbols of Christ, a gold belt and things like that. And the very topmost is, the same that's in the, it's Christ on the Book of Seals, the 7 seals. It's the same that's in the center of the altar down here. Again, it's such a very different style of stained glass that it's hard to picture that. The altar, if you want to look back here, we refer to the altar in the back as the old altar because in the 60s, Vatican II brought the altar up to the front. This altar used to be part of that altar, okay? It was cut, that altar used to be, because what's up there in front of the tabernacle now is not big enough for a priest to say Mass on. It's not big enough. But see, this used to be back there. You can actually see some holes that have been filled in the floor here where everything was moved back when they took this out. There's an Alpha and Omega on either side of the tabernacle doors. Inside there's also Ecum Sum Panis Vivus, I am the living bread, which is written onto the tabernacle doors, which is where we talked about the number 7. There are 7 steps up to the tabernacle. Again, completion and perfection. It's the Lamb of God on the book of Revelations that's in the center, which you have to get up here to take a look at. The lectern, or ambo, over here. People ask, what are those 4 symbols? Those are the 4 Gospels. Those are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We'll start with the ox over on the left. The ox is a representation of Luke. His gospel emphasized sacrifice, and the ox is a traditional symbol of a sacrificial animal. The lion over on the right is a symbol of Mark, and he was very aggressive. It was like he was a voice crying in the wilderness. St. Mark's Square in Italy has lions up on pedestals in there. The eagle underneath the ox is the symbol of John. If you've read the Gospels, John's Gospel is entirely different. It's much more intellectual. It said that he was soaring and much more lofty. And that's why he is shown with the symbol of an eagle who is soaring. And then Matthew is the last one, and he is the head of a man. It said that Matthew's gospel is the most human of all the gospels. Now, they all have halos, because they're all saints. They all have wings. And they have wings because wings represent bringing a message from God. That's why angels have wings. And sometimes you see angels without wings, okay? They may not be on a messenger service at that time, so to speak. So you get all that. Now, one of my favorite things is the statue of St. Joseph over here. You may want to take a look at it. Okay, this is a traditional statue of St. Joseph, and he's holding Christ in his arms. Why is he carrying that staff? And why does it have flowers growing out of it? Okay. Well, the story is that Mary came from a very well-to-do family. St. Anne's family was very well-to-do, and so she had many suitors, and they didn't know who Mary should marry. And so an angel appeared to their rabbi and said, "Take the walking sticks of all the men who are potential suitors and put them in the temple overnight." And when they opened the temple in the morning, Joseph's staff was blooming with lilies. So a symbol of his purity, a symbol of Mary's purity as well. And so I just think that's one of those beautiful stories that come through that you wouldn't know otherwise. There's the monogram of Joseph, the JS with a carpenter's angle up at the top. That's a symbol of his. We have Mary over here, the statue of Mary. She's standing on a crescent moon, which we talked about earlier. Her monogram is up above. There's also, on the globe that she's standing on, there's also a snake, if you haven't seen it, and that comes from Revelation, that she would crush the snake with her heel. Peter and Paul on either side that we've talked about before. So we do have books available. Again, they go into more detail than I can in the time that I have here. There are full-color pictures. It's $10, which is the church's basically cost for printing it. Yes, the windows, there are more windows. There are windows in the baptistry that all have to do with creation. Okay, they are very different. The baptistry is only open when we do baptisms now. There are also windows in the vestibule when you come in. Those are all dedicated to different symbols and parts of Mary's life. Okay, so you'll see Tower of David, Most Sacred Vessel, Mirror of Justice. These all have to do with things about Mary that are over those doors. A lot of people miss those at times. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it.